Decide once and for all, because indecision is what keeps most people trapped in the same cycles, year after year. You see, when a person says, I'll try or I'll see how it goes, what they're really saying is, I haven't decided yet. And as long as the decision isn't final, the old habits, the old ways, the old excuses, they will creep back in and reclaim their territory. A half decision is no decision at all. Nothing changes until you decide that it changes right now, with no negotiation, no hesitation, no bargaining with yourself. 1 week may seem short, but when you decide with certainty, 1 week is enough to alter the course of your life. Think about it. Every major turning point in history, in business, in relationships, in personal growth, it all started with one decision. And a moment where someone said, this is it. I will not live another day the way I did yesterday. And when you decide, something remarkable happens. Your mind begins to rearrange itself around the new commitment. Options you never saw before suddenly appear. Energy you thought you didn't have seems to rise up inside you. And most importantly, you stop entertaining the thought of going back. Imagine yourself standing at a crossroads. To the left is the path you've always taken, familiar but unfilling. To the right is the unknown, the path that leads to growth, discipline, and change. Most people hover at the crossroads, glancing left, glancing right, never really moving forward. But when you decide once and for all, you burn the bridge to the left. You say to yourself, I'm not going back. My only direction is forward. That single act of closing the door to your old ways is the key to becoming unrecognizable in just 1 week. The problem is most people live in hesitation. They want the benefits of transformation without the weight of decision. They dip their toes into change, but keep 1 foot planted in comfort. But the truth is, progress doesn't come to those who hesitate. Progress comes to those who decide with finality. And here's the real secret. The act of deciding is often more powerful than the actions that follow, because it sets the tone, it defines the standard, and it locks in the identity you are stepping into. Once you decide, the actions become easier. Waking up early doesn't feel like punishment because it's aligned with your decision. Saying no to distractions doesn't feel like sacrifice because it's consistent with who you've decided to be. Discipline isn't forced anymore. It's simply a natural extension of your commitment. Think about the difference between someone who says, I'll try to get fit this week, versus someone who says, I will not go another week living this way. The first person leaves room for failure, for excuses, for compromise. The second person slams the door shut. That decision sets them apart immediately, even before they lift a single weight or eat a single healthy meal. Decision comes first. The power of becoming unrecognizable doesn't begin with the 7 days of work. It begins the moment you decide that those 7 days will be different. That's when the shift happens inside you, when your mind and heart align with the urgency of the moment. Now here's something important. Decision is not about feeling ready. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll wait forever. Readiness is a myth. Decision creates readiness. Once you decide, the resources show up, the discipline kicks in, and the courage grows. It doesn't matter if you've failed 100 times before. One true decision can make this week unlike any other. And once you make it, you'll notice how everything else falls into place. So eliminate weak habits because nothing slows transformation more than the little things that seem harmless, but quietly steal your progress every single day. Habits are powerful. And the truth is, they work in both directions. They either push you closer to becoming who you want to be, or they keep you anchored to the version of yourself you're trying to escape. Most people underestimate the cost of their small, repeated behaviors. They say, it's just a few minutes scrolling, or it's just one more unhealthy meal, or It's just a little procrastination. But when those little habits stack day after day, week after week, they form chains stronger than steel. And you wake up wondering why life feels stagnant. If you want to become unrecognizable in 1 week, you can't afford to keep carrying these hidden weights. Think of your life like a garden. Weak habits are like weeds. On their own, they may look small and insignificant, but let it unchecked, they spread and choke out the growth of everything good. You don't need to pull every weed from the garden of your life forever. You just need to start with this week. Make it your mission to eliminate the habits you know are draining you. Be honest with yourself. You already know what they are. Maybe it's hitting snooze 3 times every morning. Maybe it's spending hours on entertainment while your goals starve for attention. Maybe it's the negative self-talk that robs you of confidence before you even begin. These habits weaken you because they send a message to your own mind. This is who I am. And as long as you keep rehearsing them, you stay trapped in the same cycle. Yes. The beauty of 1 week is that it's short enough for you to commit fully, but long enough for you to feel the difference. For just 7 days, cut off the habits that hold you down. If your weakness is late nights that drain your mornings, shut it down early this week. If your weakness is junk food, clean up your plate for 7 days. If your weakness is distractions, turn off notifications and create an environment where your focus has room to breathe. The goal is not perfection for a lifetime. The goal is proof for a week. When you eliminate the habits that weaken you, you give yourself proof that change is possible. And proof builds confidence. Confidence builds momentum. And momentum makes you unrecognizable. You see, most people don't fail because they never set big goals. They fail because they underestimate the grip of small habits. It's not the mountain that stops them. It's the pebble in their shoe. Elimination of weak habits is about removing those pebbles. It's about making the climb smoother, clearer, and more possible. And once you taste life without those daily weights, you'll realize just how much strength you've been giving away without even noticing. Here's the secret. You don't need to eliminate everything at once. Start with the 1 or 2 habits you know are hurting you most, and watch how quickly your energy shifts. When you eliminate weakness, strength naturally rises. The absence of distraction gives birth to focus. The absence of negativity gives birth to confidence. The absence of wasted time gives birth to productivity. You don't always need to add more to your life. Sometimes the fastest way forward is to subtract what no longer serves you, replace with strength, because eliminating weak habits is only half the battle. If you remove what's harmful, but fail to replace it with something stronger, the empty space will soon be filled again by the very patterns you tried to escape. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does your life. When you cut out the scrolling, the late nights, the excuses, you create room for growth. But that room must be occupied with habits that build you up, that sharpen you, that nourish you, that move you closer to the kind of person you want to become. The key is to be intentional about what you allow to take root. If you plant strength in the soil where weakness once grew, you create a foundation that can sustain change far beyond a single week. Strength comes in many forms. Mental strength, for example, begins with what you feed your mind for 1 week. Instead of consuming empty noise, consume wisdom. Pick up books that challenge your thinking. Listen to voices that inspire discipline and courage, and write down ideas that stretch your imagination. The mind is like a muscle. It responds to training. Just as lifting heavy weights builds the body, lifting heavy thoughts builds the mind. Every page of a good book, every note you take, every deep conversation, you engage in adds strength to the way you think. And when your thinking strengthens, your decisions strengthen. And when your decisions strengthen, your life strengthens. Physical strength is another key area. If your body is weak, your willpower is harder to sustain. Energy fuels discipline, and energy comes from movement, nourishment, and rest. Replace hours of lethargy with minutes of exercise. Replace food that leaves you sluggish with food that fuels you. Replace late nights of waste with sleep that restores you. You don't need to transform your body in 1 week, but you do need to give it the chance to support the new identity you are building. A strong body sends a powerful message to your mind. I am capable. I am resilient. I can endure. That message carries into every other area of your life. Emotional strength also matters. Many people live fragile lives, easily swayed by criticism, setbacks, or the moods of others. For 1 week, practice the habit of resilience. Replace reactions with responses. When negativity comes, instead of feeding it, choose gratitude. When setbacks appear, instead of quitting, choose persistence. When doubt whispers, instead of listening, choose affirmations that remind you of who you are becoming. Emotional strength is not about ignoring reality. It's about choosing a higher response to reality. That practicing for 7 days begins to rewire your patterns and gives you a steadiness that others will notice immediately. And then there's the strength of discipline itself. Replace the habit of procrastination with the habit of immediate action. Replace the habit of drifting with the habit of planning. Replace the habit of wasting hours with the habit of scheduling your priorities. Discipline is not about living a rigid life. It's about creating enough structure to free yourself from chaos. When you install discipline as a habit of strength, it becomes the guardrail that keeps you on the path you've chosen. When you replace weakness with strength, you don't just remove what was holding you back, you build a fortress that protects your progress. You create systems, habits, and routines that make the strong choice the natural choice. And the best part is strength compounds. Strength compounds. Strength compounds. The first strong habit makes the next one easier. And soon enough, you've built a chain of powerful behaviors that carry you forward. Automatically practice iron discipline, because without it, even the best intentions crumble. Discipline is the backbone of transformation, the bridge that carries you from desire to achievement. You can dream about becoming unrecognizable. You can talk about changing your life in 1 week, but unless discipline steps in, it remains nothing more than talk. Discipline is doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not. And the truth is, most people are ruled by their feelings. If they feel motivated, they act. If they don't, they stay still. But those who practice iron discipline break free from the rule of emotion and live by the standard of commitment. For just 7 days, you can test yourself by living with a discipline so strong it shocks your own system. Wake up when you said you would, not when it feels convenient. Finish the task you started, even when the mood fades. Say no to distractions that beg for your attention. No matter how tempting, stick to the plan you created, even when your energy dips. Each time you follow through, you strengthen the muscle of discipline, and with every repetition, that muscle grows. Think of discipline like training in the gym. The first few reps burn. They're uncomfortable. They make you want to quit. But those are the very reps that make you stronger. The same is true in life. The first few moments of resisting comfort, of pushing through resistance, they sting. But if you endure them, you build the power to go further, to last longer, to achieve more. Discipline is never about making life easier. It's about making you stronger. Iron discipline also protects you from the lies you tell yourself. How many times have you promised yourself you'd start tomorrow? How many times have you convinced yourself that one slip doesn't matter? Without discipline, those lies sound reasonable, even comforting. But with discipline, those lies are exposed for what they are, excuses that rob you of progress. 1 week of iron discipline can silence that inner negotiator and replace it with a voice that says, I do what I say, I keep my word, I follow through. That change in identity is what makes you unrecognizable. Discipline is also contagious. So when you practice it consistently, it spreads into every area of your life. The discipline to wake up early improves your productivity. The discipline to eat clean improves your energy. The discipline to focus on work improves your results. The discipline to manage your money improves your stability. One decision of discipline feeds another, and soon your entire life begins to reflect the strength of your choices. People will notice. They'll see the sharpness in your eyes, the confidence in your posture, the certainty in your voice. But more importantly, you'll look at yourself in the mirror and realize that you're not the same person you were a week ago, And let's be honest, discipline is not glamorous. It doesn't always feel good in the moment. It asks you to sacrifice comfort for growth, ease for effort, instant gratification for long-term reward. But that sacrifice is the price of becoming unrecognizable. Those 7 days of iron discipline carve out a new standard for yourself, a new level of personal expectation. You begin to expect more of yourself, and because you expect more, you achieve more. Guard your mind, because the thoughts you allow to take root will eventually shape the person you become. Your mind is like a gate, and every day ideas, opinions, conversations, and influences come knocking, asking to be let in. If you open the door carelessly, negativity will slip inside, distractions will take a seat, and doubt will make itself at home. But if you guard it carefully, if you become selective about what you allow to enter, your mind becomes a fortress where clarity, courage, and focus can thrive. In 1 week, you can change the entire atmosphere of your inner world by guarding diet, what comes in, and protecting what you choose to dwell on. Every result in your life begins first in your thoughts. A weak thought, repeated often, becomes a weak belief, and a weak belief produces weak actions. The same is true for strong thoughts. When you constantly feed your mind with strength, with ideas that elevate and inspire, your beliefs shift, and those beliefs command your actions. So the question is, what are you feeding your mind? Are you letting gossip, fear, and trivial entertainment dominate your hours? Or are you feeding it knowledge, wisdom, and inspiration? For 7 days, put your mind on a strict diet. Eliminate the empty calories of meaningless noise, and instead fill it with the kind of thoughts that make you stronger. Guarding your mind also means choosing the voices you listen to. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every critic deserves your energy. Not every conversation deserves your participation. Some people speak life, others speak doubt. Some people lift, others pull down. If you are not careful, you will carry other people's limitations as if they were your own. For 1 week, be ruthless about filtering voices. Surround yourself with words that build you, not words that break you. Listen to mentors, to leaders, to teachers, to examples of success and strength. Let those voices set the tone of your inner dialogue. But it's not only about what others say, it's also about what you say to yourself. Guarding your mind means becoming conscious of the language you use internally. Most people sabotage themselves with constant self-criticism, telling themselves they aren't enough, they'll never change, they'll never succeed. Those words become shackles. To guard your mind is to replace that destructive language with affirmations of discipline, power, and growth. For just 1 week, refuse to to speak against yourself. When the old voice of doubt arises, answer it with a stronger voice of certainty. Over time, your inner dialogue becomes a source of fuel instead of a drain. Guarding your mind also means controlling what you focus on. The world is full of distractions, and if you aren't deliberate, your mind will be pulled in 1,000 directions. Focus is a form of protection. When you set your attention on what matters most and shut out what doesn't, you create a shield against confusion. 1 week of guarding your focus can produce clarity so sharp, it feels like a new vision for your life. Each day you choose to focus on growth rather than problems, on action rather than excuses, on discipline rather than comfort. You train your mind to see differently. The truth is, guarding your mind isn't about being closed off. It's about being selective. You can't control every thought that tries to enter, but you can control which ones you allow to stay. Weak thoughts may knock on the door, but you don't have to invite them in. Negative influences may speak loudly, but you don't have to give them your attention. In 7 days of guarding your mind, you can reshape the landscape of your thinking and lay the foundation for a stronger identity. Stack daily momentum, because the real power of transformation doesn't come from one giant leap. It comes from consistent steps that build on each other day after day. Momentum is the invisible force that makes the hard things easier and the impossible things possible. In the beginning, change feels heavy, like trying to push a boulder up a hill. The first day of new habits, the first morning of discipline, the first choice to say no to weakness. It requires enormous effort, but if you keep pushing, even when it feels slow, even when it feels like nothing is moving, something begins to shift. The weight doesn't change, but your strength does. And with each day of follow-through, you stack momentum that begins to carry you forward with less resistance. Think of a train starting from rest. At first, the engine strains, the wheels grind, and the movement is barely noticeable. But once that train gets rolling, once it picks up speed, it becomes almost unstoppable. That's how your life works when you stack momentum daily. The first day may feel clumsy. The second day may still require force. But by the third, the fourth, the fifth, you start to feel a rhythm. And by the seventh, the effort you struggled with at the start begins to feel natural. Momentum is proof that consistency creates power. Stacking momentum means you stop treating each day as isolated and start treating them as connected. Too many people reset every morning as if yesterday didn't matter. They work hard one day, then undo it the next. They practice discipline one morning, then slip back into weakness by evening. As a result, they never build momentum. But when you link your days together, when you see them as building blocks in a single structure, you multiply your results. What you accomplished on Monday becomes the foundation for Tuesday. What you mastered on Tuesday strengthens your performance on Wednesday. By the time Friday arrives, you aren't starting over. You're standing on top of all the progress you've already stacked. Momentum also changes the way you see yourself. At first, you may doubt your ability to sustain discipline, but after a few consecutive days of following through, doubt loses its grip. You begin to identify as the kind of person who takes action, who keeps promises, who pushes through resistance. Identity is built not in a single act, but in repeated acts. And momentum is the evidence that your new identity is becoming stronger each day. In just 1 week, the shift can be so dramatic that you'll look back at who you were only days ago and barely recognize yourself. Momentum even carries into the smallest areas of your life. The discipline to wake up early makes it easier to stay productive. The choice to eat clean makes it easier to exercise. The decision to focus makes it easier to learn. Each victory reinforces the next. It's like lining up dominoes. When one falls, it triggers the others. Momentum stacks victories until success feels inevitable. But here's the key. Momentum must be guarded. It doesn't take much to lose it. A single day of negligence, a single excuse, a single decision to stop pushing can slow the train and make starting over feel heavy again. That's why 1 week is so powerful. It's short enough to stay focused, but long enough to build a streak strong enough to prove to yourself that you can keep going. Each day you add to the stack, the easier it becomes to add another, and soon the weight shifts from forcing yourself to act into simply riding the wave you've created. Shock yourself first, because the goal of transformation is not to impress the world, but to astonish yourself with what you're capable of when you stop living small too often. People chase recognition, waiting for others to applaud their progress, but real change begins the moment you decide to outgrow your own expectations. The most powerful motivation comes not from external praise, but from the internal. IT, surprise of realizing you've gone further than you ever thought possible. When you set out to become unrecognizable in a week, the first person who needs to be stunned by the results. Is the one staring back at you in the mirror. You think about how often you underestimate yourself. You assume you don't have the discipline. You assume you don't have the energy. You assume you don't have the focus. These assumptions become cages, keeping you stuck in patterns that feel unbreakable. But the moment you prove yourself wrong, even once, you begin to see that those limits were illusions. Imagine the power of shocking yourself every single day for 7 days straight. Wake up earlier than you thought you could. Work harder than you believed possible. Resist temptations you always gave into before. Finish tasks you once procrastinated on endlessly. By the end of the week, the evidence of who you really are will be undeniable. Shocking yourself is not about extremes or dramatic gestures. It's about consistently doing what the old version of you thought was impossible. It could be as simple as completing a workout without quitting. Halfway. It could be writing pages of ideas when you previously struggled to write a paragraph. It could be saying no to an invitation that you know would derail your focus. Each of these small victories adds up to one big realization. You've been underestimating yourself all along. The reason this is so powerful is because confidence doesn't come from compliments. It comes from proof. And proof is created when you shock yourself with actions you didn't think you could take. You don't build confidence by standing in front of the mirror and repeating positive words alone. You build it by showing yourself that you can live at a higher standard. 7 days of shocking yourself builds a bank of evidence so strong that doubt has no place left to stand. And when you shock yourself, everything changes. You begin to look at challenges differently. The task that once felt overwhelming now feels like a test you're eager to face. The discipline that once felt impossible now feels natural. The confidence you once lacked begins to shine through your voice, your posture, your decisions. Other people notice, yes, but their recognition is just a reflection of the shift you've already felt inside. You no longer need their applause to believe you're changing because you've seen the proof with your own eyes. The truth is, no one else knows the full extent of your potential. They can only judge based on what they've seen of you in the past. That's why it's dangerous to live for the approval of others. You'll always be limited by their perception of you. But when you shock yourself first, you break through every limit they've ever placed on you because you're no longer living within their definition. You're writing a new one. For 1 week, make it your mission not to convince the world you've changed, but to convince yourself. And once you've done that, the world won't be able to ignore it anyway. Carry the fire forward, because 1 week of transformation means nothing if it ends when the calendar flips. So the purpose of becoming unrecognizable in 7 days is not to prove you can live at a higher level temporarily, but to establish a standard that becomes permanent. A fire that burns brightly for only a moment leaves no lasting warmth. But a fire that is carried forward can light the way for the rest of your journey. The week is the spark, but it is up to you to keep feeding it, to keep protecting it, to keep it alive until it becomes part of who you are. Carrying the fire forward means refusing to let momentum fade. After a week of discipline, clarity, and growth, the temptation will come to relax, to ease back into comfort, to say, I proved my point, now I can stop. That is the moment when the fire is most at risk of going out. You must recognize that the week was not the finish line, but the starting point. The habits you built, the strength you discovered, the confidence you created, these are not temporary experiments. They are the foundation of a new life. If you let them go, you return to the very patterns you fought so hard to break. But if you carry them forward, even imperfectly, the spark becomes a flame, and the flame becomes a force that can't be extinguished. Think of it like climbing a mountain. The first 7 days are the hardest because you're breaking old habits and pushing through resistance. By the end of the week, you've reached a higher level, and from there, the view is different. You see possibilities you couldn't see before. You feel stronger than you did when you started. The question then is whether you will settle at that point or keep climbing. Carrying the fire forward is the decision to keep climbing, to keep challenging yourself, to keep building momentum so that each week builds on the last until transformation becomes your way of life. Carrying the fire forward also means protecting what you've built. Fires can be fragile. One gust of distraction, one storm of negativity, one lapse of discipline can dim the flame. That's why you must guard it. Continue to eliminate the habits that weaken you. Continue to replace them with habits that strengthen you. Continue to surround yourself with voices that sharpen your thinking, and protect your mind from influences that would smother your progress. When you treat your fire as sacred, you ensure it doesn't flicker out when life gets difficult. Another key to carrying the fire forward is to let it grow beyond yourself. A fire that stays small burns out quickly, but a fire that spreads becomes unstoppable. Share what you've learned. Encourage others who are struggling, lead by example, showing through your actions that real change is possible. When your fire lights someone else's, it fuels your own in return. Thirdly, the act of inspiring others reinforces your commitment and makes it harder for you to fall back into old ways, And finally, carrying the fire forward means remembering why you lit it in the first place. It's easy to get lost in routine, to forget the pain that pushed you to change, to lose sight of the vision that drove you, to take the first step. Keep your why close to you. Write it down, repeat it, remind yourself of it daily. That why is the fuel that keeps the fire burning when the days grow long and the challenges grow heavy. Without it, even the strongest flames fade. With it, even the smallest spark can endure through storms. You have seen what can happen in just 1 week when you decide once and for all, when you eliminate weak habits, when you replace them with strength, when you practice iron discipline, when you guard your mind, when you stack daily momentum, when you shock yourself first, and when you carry the fire forward. 7 days may not sound like much, but it is more than enough to prove to yourself that change is real, that discipline is possible, that strength is within you, and that you have been capable all along. The question is not whether 1 week can change you. It can. The real question is whether you will take that first step, whether you will push through those 7 days with intensity and commitment, whether you will dare to look in the mirror and see a person you barely not recognize because the old you is gone and the new you has arrived. If you want a life that looks different, you must become someone different. And that begins not someday, not next month, not next year, but right now. 1 week is enough to change your story if you are bold enough to live it with everything you've got.